Before we dive into this tale of war, survival, and vengeance, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who love epic stories. And most importantly, I want to hear from you in the comments. Would humanity fight with this kind of fury if our children were threatened? Your voice makes these stories come alive. I deliver this recording in what I believe will be the final hour of my life. Those were the words of a pirate commander who had no idea what storm he had unleashed. For centuries, humanity had been overlooked by the great empires of the galaxy. Too young, too fragile, too unprepared to matter. To the powerful, Earth was nothing more than a backwater world with no fleets, no colonies, and no armies worth fearing. A perfect target. And then came the mistake. The kind of mistake that echoes across history. A band of raiders, arrogant and merciless, thought they could take what they wanted. They struck human settlements, stealing supplies, destroying lives. And when one of them grew annoyed by the sound of a crying infant, he pulled the trigger. One shot, one child, one mother's scream. The pirates thought it meant nothing. To them, life was cheap. They couldn't imagine that for humans, the protection of their young was sacred, something worth dying for. That moment, captured and spread across every colony and every home on Earth, lit a fire no enemy could extinguish. The commander's last words tell the rest. We thought killing their children would break them. Instead, it doomed us all. What followed was not just war, it was vengeance. Entire pirate fleets burned. Strongholds were wiped from the stars. Humanity, once dismissed as weak, rose like a storm. They fought with a fury so raw, so relentless, that entire civilizations began whispering a new name for them. The War Apes. But this story is not only about revenge. It is about a species that had always told itself stories of monsters and gods, angels and demons, and then suddenly realized that they themselves could become the monsters that others feared. Humanity's brutality and unity under threat shook the galaxy to its core. Allies were terrified and inspired in equal measure. Enemies crumbled, and a question that echoed through every council chamber, every fleet command, every alien stronghold was simple. How much longer before these humans decide they want more than revenge? This is a tale of how a single act of cruelty changed the fate of empires. How humanity went from prey to predator, from the overlooked to the unstoppable. It is a story of rage, war, and survival, and of the choices that will decide whether the galaxy burns in endless conflict or bows to a new power rising from Earth. So listen closely. Because once you hear this story, you may never look at humanity the same way again. I deliver this recording in what I believe will be the final hour of my life. Those were the first words of Commander, whose name once spread fear across the stars. He had raided colonies, plundered trade routes, and left burning wreckage in his wake. To his people, he was a pirate lord, cunning and ruthless, celebrated for his victories. But in the final hour of his life, as fire and smoke filled the corridors of his flagship, he was reduced to little more than a broken voice whispering into a dying console. His words, carried across static and distortion, became a warning not just to his kind, but to the galaxy itself. A warning about a species so underestimated, so dismissed, that their rise would shake the foundations of empires. That species was us. For centuries, Earth was a name of little consequence. A young world, still learning to stretch its arms into the void. No fleets of grandeur, no sprawling network of colonies, no titanic stations bristling with defenses. To the great powers, Earth was a child in a galaxy of adults, barely worth a second glance. And to the pirates who thrived on weakness, it was perfect prey. The commander's voice cracked with exhaustion as he spoke of those days. He admitted freely that he and his raiders had been given quiet permission to attack, sometimes at the bidding of governments who turned a blind eye, sometimes by their own greed. They struck where they wished, plundering for profit, seizing what they desired. To them, Earth was no different. Another backwater world, another victim. But they made a mistake. Not a tactical misstep, not a navigational error, but a mistake of the soul. One act of arrogance, so small in their eyes, yet so devastating in its consequence that it changed the fate of empires. He described the day his raiders descended upon a settlement, its defenses minimal, its people unprepared. They took supplies. They burned homes. And then came the sound. A cry. Not of soldiers. Not of soldiers steel clashing defense, but the cry of an infant. One of his officers, annoyed by the noise, raised his weapon. A single shot. A single life taken. The mother, wounded, struck back with a rage so primal that she killed the raider with her bare hands, even as blood poured from her body. She died moments later, her child lifeless in her arms. The pirates laughed at the absurdity. To them, children were expendable, lives cheap, easily replaced. But humanity is not like them. For us, the cry of a child is more than sound. It is a promise of tomorrow. To harm one is to touch the core of who we are. And when that image, the image of a mother's scream, her desperate strike, her fall, spread across Earth, something ancient awoke in the human spirit. The commander's voice grew frantic as he recalled what followed. 4 of his companies were destroyed in a single day. His officers, thinking to exploit human love for children, threatened to kill more. But in doing so, they revealed themselves not as raiders, not as conquerors, but as monsters. And when humanity sees a monster threatening its young, there is no limit to what it will do. The recordings his fleet intercepted spoke of rage, unlike any they had known. Entire populations rising. Factories working day and night. Shipyards glowing with fire as vessels were built at impossible speed. Soldiers training with a determination no pirate could fathom. The galaxy expected humans to scatter like prey. Instead, they united like wolves. And the pirates who once laughed? They began to die. The commander admitted to trying everything. Negotiation, threats, offers of trade. But every word he spoke only hardened humanity's resolve. His last message ended with a warning not to repeat his mistake. Do not target their young, he begged. Do not doom us all. Moments later, the sound of human voices, the crash of weapons, and the silence of his death ended the transmission. But his warning came too late. By then, Earth was already aflame with purpose. The first fleets were not polished or elegant. They were ugly, rushed, built in desperation. But desperation has a way of creating resolve. And humanity poured everything into the fight. In the training camps, mothers and fathers volunteered side by side, each carrying with them the memory of what had been taken. Engineers who once built machines for commerce now turned their hands to weapons. Children who had grown up in the glow of screens now sat in cockpits, learning to fly, their innocence replaced with grim determination. Across Earth, the image of that mother and child was played over and over. In shipyards, it echoed as welders forged steel. In academies, it was shown before every lesson. In parliaments and councils, it was the first sound before debate began. The cry of a child, the shot, the scream of a mother, and silence. It became not just a memory, but a vow. And soon, the galaxy began to notice. Alien anthropologists watched with unease as humans prepared for war. They had studied countless species, measured countless civilizations, but this one was different. Other species feared monsters from legends, demons from myths, invaders with impossible power. Humans, by contrast, seemed to consider such fantasies normal, but when it came to real threats, they did not freeze. They acted. The pirate fleets, once so feared, began to crumble. Bases that had stood for centuries were wiped away in days. In quadrant after quadrant, human ships fell upon them with ruthless precision. Where other species fought for survival, humans fought for vengeance. And vengeance, it seemed, made them unstoppable. Alien councils whispered in fear. If humans were this ferocious in defense of their children, what would they do if truly provoked? What if one day they looked outward not just to survive, but to conquer? The commander's last words became a haunting refrain across the stars. Do not target their young. Do not doom us all. But the doom had already begun. The council chambers of allied races filled with debate. Some argued that humans were an opportunity, fierce allies who could turn the tide of war. Others argued they were a danger, a flame that could consume the galaxy itself. But all agreed on one thing. Humanity was no longer weak, no longer prey. They were something new, something terrifying. And as the galaxy watched human fleets burn pirate strongholds, a name began to spread. A name whispered with fear, spoken in awe. War Apes. That is how the story begins. With the arrogance of raiders, the cry of a child, and the fury of a people who refuse to be broken. Humanity's rise had only just begun, and the galaxy was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. The galaxy is vast. Civilizations rise and fall across endless stars, each believing itself eternal, each imagining that history will bend to its will. But history is merciless, and it bends for no one. When the first recordings of humanity's retaliation spread beyond Earth, they did not just reach pirate fleets. They reached the halls of power in alien empires, in confederations that spanned dozens of worlds, in alliances that had lasted centuries. And what they saw disturbed them in ways they could not yet put into words. In the council chambers of the Keelan Confederation, the recording played again and again. The cry of a human child, the flash of a weapon, the scream of a mother, and then the unthinkable, a colony not retreating, not surrendering, but rising up in savage, suicidal fury. Delegates shifted in their seats, scales shedding, feathers ruffling, mandibles clicking in unease. They should have broken, one ambassador muttered. Instead, they became stronger. The chief anthropologist of the Keelan Confederation, an old reptilian scholar with scales dull by age, stood before the assembly. He stroked his chin, his tail flicking anxiously as he spoke. We must understand the species. I have studied their histories, their myths, their stories. They are unlike any race we have encountered. The chamber grew quiet. Explain, a politician demanded. They do not fear the things we fear, the scholar replied. Their legends are filled with impossible monsters, demons, gods. They imagine horrors beyond reason, and they do not break before them. To them, fear is not paralyzing. It is fuel. He paused, his voice dropping lower. And when it comes to their children, there is nothing rational left. They will burn themselves to ashes to protect the young. They will fight when logic demands surrender. They will die in multitudes if it means their children live. Tell me, honored council, how do we negotiate with such a people? The silence that followed was heavy. For every empire, for every council, the truth was the same. Humanity was awake, and nothing would be the same again. Meanwhile, on Earth, the transformation deepened. Shipyards glowed day and night. Factories thundered without pause. Entire populations shifted into wartime footing. What began as vengeance against raiders became something greater, a unifying cause. For the first time in their fractured history, humans found themselves one people. Nations that had once squabbled now shared designs for ships. Scientists pooled their research. Soldiers trained under a single banner. The memory of the murdered children and the burning colonies became the binding force of an entire world. And the fleets grew. The first engagements were brutal. Human ships were crude, often rushed to completion, their weapons stripped from whatever designs could be cobbled together. But the crews were relentless. Where other species hesitated, humans pressed forward. Where others counted losses and retreated, humans counted losses and attacked again. They fought not like soldiers, but like predators. They bled, they broke, but they never stopped. Word spread quickly. In quadrant after quadrant, pirate strongholds fell. Worlds once enslaved were freed in fire. Trade routes once dominated by raiders became battlegrounds where humans chased their prey with merciless fury. The galaxy took notice. In the Council of the Chinean Union, a feline ambassador hissed with frustration as the reports poured in. They burn everything. Pirates, fortresses, whole fleets. They do not spare, they do not bargain. Is this war or is this extermination? A Golian feathered delegate answered in a low, cautious tone. It is vengeance. And vengeance knows no restraint. They debated late into the night. Should humanity be courted as allies? Feared as rivals? Watched as enemies? The chief anthropologist of the Union, a frail bird-like scholar, issued his warning. Understand this. Humans are predators. Active predators. Unlike us, unlike most who evolved in ambush or patience, they chase their prey until it falls. Their bodies are built to endure, to run for days, to bleed, and still keep moving. They're the only species we know who can fight until exhaustion itself kills them, and they have now applied this instinct to war. His words chilled the chamber. If they are treated as prey, they will run you to death. If they are treated as rivals, they will fight until you collapse. And if they are treated as monsters, they will become monsters. The silence stretched. Finally, the presiding counselor spoke. Then we must ask ourselves, do we wish to fight beside such a species or against it? Across the stars, the name began to spread. At first it was whispered, a label passed in fear between soldiers. Then it grew, repeated in council chambers, in intercepted transmissions, in propaganda both for and against. The War Apes. Some spat the name with disgust. Others spoke it with admiration. But all understood its meaning. A species that fights not for power, not for conquest, but with animal ferocity no empire could match. And still, humanity pressed on. For the raiders, the nightmare only deepened. Their strongholds were shattered one by one. Captains who once boasted of their trophies now begged for mercy that never came. The pirates who had killed children were hunted without pause. They could not hide, for the humans did not stop. One report told of an entire pirate flotilla destroyed by human ships that should not have survived. Their vessels burned, oxygen failing, reactors on the verge of collapse. Yet the humans rammed their enemies, dragged them into fire, tore them apart piece by piece. No surrender, no retreat. The galaxy watched with a mixture of horror and awe. For centuries, humans had been irrelevant. Now, they were rewriting the rules of war. But even as victories mounted, new fears arose. If humanity could fight with such fury when wronged, what would they do when ambition stirred? What if vengeance was not enough to sate them? What if, one day, they looked beyond pirates and raiders and turned their fury outward to empires themselves? In the Council of the Keelan Confederation, the revered speaker asked a question none dare voice. Will they stop, or have we unleashed something that cannot be contained? The chamber fell silent. No one answered. On Earth, soldiers returned from their first campaign scarred but unbroken. They told stories of victory, of vengeance, of comrades who fought until their last breath. Children listened with wide eyes. Families wept and swore they would never be victims again. Factories doubled production. Training camps overflowed. New colonies prepared to send their sons and daughters to fight. Humanity was no longer defending. Humanity was advancing. And in the void between the stars, the fires of vengeance spread, illuminating the galaxy with a truth that could no longer be denied. The War Apes had arrived. The galaxy stood at a crossroads. Some saw salvation in the fury of humans. Others saw only doom. Alliances formed, secret plans whispered, strategies rewritten. But one question lingered above all. Would humanity be content with vengeance, or would their fury remake the galaxy itself? The galaxy was not ready for what followed. Humanity's vengeance against the raiders had already redrawn the map of power, but it was only the beginning. In the weeks and months that came after, a strange new reality spread across the stars. Human fleets did not merely fight battles. They transformed the very balance of fear. Wherever they went, the void itself seemed to burn brighter, the echoes of their war resounding far beyond the borders of their small, young world. At first, the galaxy had watched with morbid fascination. Pirate bases collapsing, fortresses erased, raiding fleets hunted down like prey. But as the victories mounted, that fascination gave way to something more unsettling: recognition. Humanity was not simply destroying raiders. They were learning. Each battle sharpened them. Each loss hardened them. Each victory emboldened them. And soon, the galaxy began to whisper of alliances, not because they trusted humanity, but because they feared what might happen if they remained alone. It began quietly. Small envoys arriving on Earth, their ships cautious, their words carefully measured. Some came under the guise of diplomacy, others under the cover of trade, but the intent was clear: to understand the new predator that had awoken in the dark. The first delegation came from the Helari Concord, a people of silver-skinned diplomats and subtle words. They found Earth transformed. Cities glowed not with festivals or commerce, but with the harsh light of industry. Every port was crowded with freighters carrying ore. Every factory thundered with the forging of steel. Every sky was streaked with the trails of ships bound for war. The Helari spoke softly, offering words of sympathy, of partnership, of cooperation. But behind their words was fear. They had seen too many species rise to power. Too many predators consume everything in their path. And as they watched humans walk their streets, eyes hardened, shoulders squared, voices filled with grim determination, the Helari asked themselves whether they were looking at partners or the architects of their own downfall. The second delegation came from the Croft, a race of scaled warriors with a history of mercenary service across the galaxy. They expected to find chaos, young soldiers drunk on vengeance, leaders overwhelmed by ambition. Instead, they found order. Human armies trained with precision, not savagery. Commanders studied every battle report, adapting faster than any species the Croft had ever encountered. The Croft general who led the delegation later spoke in council. They are not merely warriors. They are strategists. They fight with fury, yes, but also with terrifying calculation. Their vengeance is not blind. It is precise. And so, one by one, the delegations came. Some to ally, some to spy, some simply to beg. But even as envoys filled Earth's halls, the fleets did not stop. Humanity pressed outward, chasing raiders into the farthest reaches. Worlds once thought unreachable found themselves caught in the storm. And as human ships crossed new thresholds, as they pushed deeper into the unknown, they encountered something unexpected: gratitude. There were planets that had suffered under pirate terror for centuries, worlds whose people had long since given up hope. When human fleets arrived, bringing not occupation but liberation, the reaction was explosive. Cheers rose in streets where despair had lived for generations. Children looked to the skies and saw not raiders, but rescues. For the first time in living memory, the oppressed saw salvation. Human soldiers, hardened by grief, found themselves embraced as heroes. And though their faces remained grim, though the weight of vengeance still drove them, the seeds of something else began to grow. For the first time, they were not just feared, they were respected. In the alien councils, this respect became a new cause for alarm. They are not just feared, one ambassador warned. They are admired. They are inspiring loyalty among those they liberate. If this continues, they will not simply be powerful. They will be followed. The council chambers erupted in debate. Some argued this was a chance to bind humanity to existing alliances, to welcome them before they grew too strong. Others demanded containment, urging blockades and sanctions, fearful that today's liberators will become tomorrow's conquerors. But one voice stood above the rest, a scholar of the Ithri, a long-lived race of thinkers. His words carried the weight of centuries. You speak of strategy, of alliances, of containment. You do not yet understand what you face. Humanity does not fight as we do. They do not retreat when beaten. They do not surrender when cornered. They do not calculate their losses as a reason to stop. For them, loss is fuel. Defeat is instruction. Pain is transformation. Every battle they lose only makes them more dangerous. He paused, his eyes glinting under the council's pale light. You call them War Apes, but you do not yet understand what that means. It is not a name of insult. It is prophecy. Back on Earth, the people themselves began to shift. The tragedy of the murdered children still burned in their hearts. But new voices began to rise. Voices that asked questions more dangerous than vengeance. If we can fight like this for survival, they asked, what could we achieve if we fought for more? If we fought not just to live, but to lead? The idea spread quietly at first, whispered in academies, murmured in barracks, debated in parliaments. Humanity had united against the raiders. But unity, once forged, does not easily dissolve. The fleets were built. The armies were trained. The factories thundered without pause. And now that vengeance had nearly run its course, the question arose, what comes next? The answer was unclear. But the galaxy already trembled at the possibilities. The pirates who still survived told new stories of terror. They spoke of battles where humans pursued them across star systems, refusing to let them go, chasing until fuel ran dry, until oxygen was gone, until every last pirate ship was torn apart. They spoke of soldiers who fought even when their suits were cracked, their lungs bleeding, their bodies failing. Soldiers who refused to fall until their enemies were dead. And still, the galaxy struggled to comprehend. For most species, war was a matter of balance. Strength measured against cost, victory weighed against survival. For humans, it seemed war was something different, something older, something primal. It was not strategy alone nor vengeance alone, but an instinct burned deep into their very nature. The instinct of predators who once hunted across endless plains, who had run prey to exhaustion, who had fought through famine and fire and plague. That instinct, sharpened by millennia, now turned outward into the void. And in the silence of alien councils, the realization grew. Humanity was not merely another young race rising. They were something new, something dangerous, something inevitable. Whispers spread faster than fleets. Whispers of their victories, of their relentlessness, of their refusal to surrender. In marketplaces and starports, in the hidden corners of distant worlds, beings spoke of the War Apes with awe and dread. Some prayed to never meet them. Others prayed they would arrive soon, bringing freedom from raiders. But all agreed on one thing. The galaxy would never again be the same. And so, closed as on the edge of transformation, humanity had begun as victims. They had become avengers. And now, they stood at the threshold of something greater, something the galaxy could not yet define, but could already feel shaking the foundations of power. The fleets moved, the factories thundered, the councils debated, and everywhere, across the stars, the whispers grew louder. The War Apes are coming. The galaxy had watched humanity rise from the ashes of tragedy, but now, a deeper fear began to take root. It was no longer a question of whether the War Apes could fight, that had been answered 100 times over. The question now was far more dangerous. What would they do with such power once vengeance was satisfied? In the quiet corridors of alien power, the whispers grew louder. They were united by grief, some said. When that grief fades, will they remain united? They were driven by vengeance, others argued. When the pirates are gone, will their fury turn outward? And in the most fearful corners of the galaxy, a thought none dared speak aloud took shape. What if humanity has discovered its true nature and cannot turn it off? On Earth, the transformation was undeniable. The factories still thundered, though pirate fleets had dwindled. Training camps overflowed, though the great raids had nearly ended. And the shipyards, vast as continents, continued to pour out vessels at a pace that defied belief. What had begun as vengeance had become momentum, and momentum, once forged, is not easily stopped. Politicians try to explain it away. We must be ready, they said. The raiders may return. Other threats may rise. But the truth was simpler and far more unsettling. Humanity had tasted unity. Humanity had tasted strength. And they were not willing to let it go. The galaxy saw it too. Envoys who once visited Earth cautiously now returned in greater numbers. Some brought offers of alliance. Others brought veiled threats. And a few came only to observe. But all returned to the same story. Humanity had changed. The silver-skinned Helari whispered of cities that no longer slept, their lights burning brighter than ever before. The reptilian cross spoke of soldiers who trained with zeal unmatched by any they had seen. And the winged envoys of the Ithri reported on shipyards that seemed to multiply overnight, their capacity doubling again and again. Even as pirate fleets collapsed, humanity built more. Even as the need for armies lessened, humanity trained more. It was as if the War Apes had decided that vengeance was only the beginning. In the councils of the galaxy, fear turned to action. Some argued for alliances, treaties, and partnerships to bind humanity into cooperation. Give them a stake in our stability, said a Helari ambassador. Anchor their fury with responsibility. Others argued for containment. Cut them off, hissed the Chinian delegate. Blockade their systems. Limit their expansion before it spreads beyond control. But there were darker voices as well, voices that whispered preemptive strikes. Destroy them now, urged a Croth general. Strike before they grow beyond our ability to stop them. Today they fight pirates. Tomorrow they may fight us. The council splintered. No consensus came. And in that fracture, humanity grew stronger still. Meanwhile, among humans themselves, the seeds of ambition began to sprout. In parliaments and military councils, debates raged. Some leaders insisted humanity must remain focused on defense, on security, on ensuring that no child would ever again be taken. But others asked questions that carried heavier weight. If we have built fleets as powerful, they asked, should they remain idle once the pirates are gone? If we have trained armies as vast, should they simply be dismissed? If we have found unity through war, should we abandon it in peace? The voices of ambition spoke of opportunity. They spoke of colonies waiting to be claimed, resources waiting to be harvested, and territories waiting to be secured. They spoke of a future where humanity was not merely respected, not merely feared, but dominant. And though many resisted, the whispers of ambition spread. For the first time, cracks appeared in the unity forged by grief. Not divisions that weakened, but divisions that sharpened. On one side stood those who demanded restraint, who remembered the cost of vengeance and feared the path of conquest. On the other stood those who believed that restraint was weakness, that the galaxy respected only power, and that humanity had a chance to seize a destiny greater than survival. The soldiers in the field felt the tension too. Some returned from liberated worlds embraced as heroes, convinced that their mission was righteous. Others returned hardened by fire, convinced that mercy was foolish, that only strength ensured safety. The duality grew. Humanity had become both liberator and conqueror, both savior and predator, and the galaxy could not tell which side would win. In distant starports, the whispers grew. Merchants spoke of human fleets patrolling trade routes once lawless, enforcing order where chaos had reigned. But others told darker tales, of human admirals demanding tribute in exchange for protection, of colonies that bent to Earth's authority without resistance. Some called it justice. Others called it empire. And in the council chambers of alien empires, the debate raged anew. Do you not see? One ambassador cried. They are becoming what they fought. They claim to fight for survival, but survival is no longer in question. They are expanding. They are securing. They are building an empire before our very eyes. Another countered. No, they are building stability. The pirates are gone because of them. Trade flows freely again. Worlds are safe again. Would you call that empire or salvation? The debate had no end, but the fear remained. Then came the moment that shifted everything. In the far reaches of the galaxy, beyond the old pirate territories, lay the Draelics Combined, a minor empire that had once quietly funded raiders for profit. For years they had watched humanity with suspicion, certain that the War Apes would exhaust themselves. But when reports came that human fleets were moving closer to their borders, the Draelics panicked. They issued threats. They demanded withdrawal. And when those demands were ignored, they fired. For the first time, humanity faced not raiders, but the military of a sovereign empire. The battle was brutal. The Draelics had advanced ships, hardened fleets, and disciplined soldiers. But they were not ready for humanity's style of war. The War Apes did not fight with patience. They did not calculate acceptable losses. They fought with relentless momentum, pressing until the Draelics' lines cracked, pressing until their fleets retreated in chaos. The galaxy held its breath. Humanity had crossed the line. They had gone from defending against raiders to fighting an empire, and they had won. The victory sent shockwaves across the stars. Some called it proof that humanity was unstoppable. Others called it proof that humanity was out of control. But all agreed on one thing. The age of dismissing Earth as irrelevant was over. For the first time in history, the galaxy looked to a small, fragile world on the edge of the stars and saw not prey, not victims, not vengeance, but power. And as the dust settled from the Draelics' war, a single truth began to emerge. The War Apes had tasted more than survival. They had tasted victory over an empire, and they hungered for more. The war with the Draelics Combine was short, brutal, and decisive. For centuries, the Draelics had been considered a regional power, dangerous to their neighbors, influential in their councils, secure in their fleets. And yet, in a matter of months, they were broken. To the galaxy, the outcome was more than shocking. It was unthinkable. The raiders had been outlaws, parasites living in the shadows. To see them destroyed was no surprise. But to watch an empire fall, to a species barely a century into spaceflight, that shook the very foundations of galactic order. Whispers filled the starports. The War Apes destroyed the Draelix fleets. The War Apes took their colonies. The War Apes are building something greater than vengeance. For the first time, fear turned to awe. For the first time, the galaxy began to believe what some had already feared, that humanity's fury was not temporary, that it was destiny. On Earth, the victory was celebrated with solemn pride. There were no great parades, no golden arches of triumph. Instead, there were gatherings in factories, speeches in training grounds, quiet moments in homes where families remembered what had been lost. And yet, beneath the solemnity, something else stirred. Confidence. The knowledge that humanity had stood against an empire and prevailed. The knowledge that their fleets, once crude and desperate, now rivaled the powers of the galaxy. The knowledge that the War Apes were no longer defending, but advancing. Factories redoubled their efforts. Shipyards expanded beyond Earth's orbit, stretching into the asteroid belts and beyond. Colonies volunteered resources, manpower, entire generations to the cause. The war had ended, but the momentum had not. In alien councils, the reaction was divided. Some called for unity with humanity, desperate to harness their strength as allies rather than enemies. Bind them to us, the Helari ambassador urged. Give them a seat at our tables, a role in our decisions. Let them carry our banners as well as their own. Others cried for resistance. Do you not see? Demanded the Chinean delegate. They are expanding. They are securing. They are not stopping. If we allow them to continue, they will not be allies. They will be rulers. The debate raged with no resolution. Alliances shifted, whispers spread, and across the galaxy, every eye turned toward Earth. Meanwhile, humanity itself began to fracture in new ways, not in weakness, but in philosophy. Some leaders urged caution. We are not conquerors, they said. We have avenged our children, secured our future. Let us not become what we despise. Others argued with equal passion. Safety is not enough, they insisted. Survival is not enough. If we stop here, the galaxy will remember us as a fury that burned bright and faded. If we continue, the galaxy will remember us as something greater, the masters of destiny. And among the people, the second voice carried weight. For every family that longed for peace, there was another that longed for purpose. For every soldier who wished to lay down arms, there was another who refused to rest until humanity stood unchallenged. The colonies beyond Earth echoed this divide. On some worlds, settlers cheered the fleets as liberators, eager to support their rise. On others, whispers of unease spread, fearful that Earth's embrace was becoming a grip too tight to escape. Yet whether they cheered or whispered, none could deny the truth. Humanity was no longer a victim. Humanity was no longer a avenger. Humanity was becoming empire. In the distant chambers of the Ithri scholars, ancient records were unearthed. They spoke of species that had risen in fury, only to collapse under their own weight. They spoke of predators who had once ruled, only to vanish into history. But when the scholars compared these records to humanity, they found no easy parallels. For humanity was not like those who came before. They were not bound by single instincts, not limited by singular drives. They were adaptable, unpredictable, capable of both mercy and savagery. They are not a predator, one scholar concluded. They are a paradox. They are both predator and protector, both liberator and conqueror. And that makes them more dangerous than anything we have ever known. As months turned to years, the paradox only grew. Human fleets began to patrol trade routes not just near Earth, but across entire sectors. Pirates dared not return, not even in whispers. Freed worlds petitioned Earth for protection, willingly trading loyalty for security. And slowly, a network of alliances, treaties, and dependencies formed around the War Apes. To some, it was salvation. To others, it was the birth of empire. And in both, there was truth. The alien powers who once debated now began to act. Some offered Earth open alliances, seeking protection under their fury. Others conspired in secret, planning blockades and resistance. Still others watched silently, waiting to see which path humanity would choose. And humanity, for all its unity, for all its momentum, began to feel the weight of destiny pressing down. Would they stop, content with safety? Or would they push forward, seizing the galaxy itself? Then came the first signs of their answer. A fleet of human warships, returning victorious from the Draelix front, was met not with parades but with new command. They were ordered not home, not to rest, but outward, into uncharted territories, into systems untouched by pirate or empire alike. The message was clear. Vengeance was over. Expansion had begun. Alien spies whispered of the shift in dark council chambers. They no longer fight only for the past. One warned. They fight for future. They fight for a destiny greater than we feared. The galaxies shivered, and everywhere, across the stars, the name spread louder than ever. The War Apes are not stopping. The War Apes are coming. The War Apes had risen. Their fleet stretched across the stars. Their industry thundered without pause, and their name carried with it equal parts fear and hope. But as humanity pressed outward, unrelenting, the galaxy itself began to stir. At first, resistance was scattered, lone empires grumbling in their council halls, jealous rivals whispering in shadows. But whispers have a way of spreading, and fear has a way of binding even the most divided. Soon, what began as murmurs became voices. What began as scattered complaints became alliances, and what began as unease became a storm. The first sign came not in battle, but in silence. Trade ships that once welcomed human patrols began to avoid them. Alien envoys who once filled Earth's chambers suddenly canceled their journeys. Colonies that cheered the War Apes' liberation grew quiet, their markets subdued, their banners withdrawn. And then, one by one, the old powers began to meet. In the halls of the Keelan Confederation, the Chinean Union, the Ithri scholars, and even the cautious Helari, a common realization emerged. Humanity had grown too quickly, too far, too strong. They were born from tragedy, the Keelan speaker said, but now they hunger for destiny. They liberate, the Chinean snarled, but they do not leave. They promise freedom, but their fleets remain. This is not liberation. This is conquest with a mask. The Helari ambassador, more cautious, raised a hand. And yet, without them, pirates would return. Without them, trade would falter. Without them, how many of our colonies would still be enslaved? The chamber roared with debate. Some demanded alliance. Others demanded resistance. But for the first time, one truth united them. Humanity could no longer be ignored. On Earth, the mood was shifting as well. The victory over the Draelix had given confidence, but it had also sown division. Politicians argued in parliaments. Generals clashed in strategy halls, and citizens debated in marketplaces. Were they liberators, bringing peace to a chaotic galaxy? Or were they becoming conquerors, disguising ambition behind the language of protection? The soldiers felt it most of all. On liberated worlds, they were greeted with cheers. Children ran to greet them. Families offered gifts. Leaders pledged loyalty. But behind the smiles, there was unease. Whispers grew louder. When will they leave? Will they ever leave? For some soldiers, this was unbearable. We bleed for them, one said bitterly. We die to free them, and still they fear us. For others, the whispers did not wound. They hardened resolve. Fear is respect, another answered. Fear keeps them loyal. Fear keeps us safe. And so the divide deepened. Humanity had become two things at once: saviors and tyrants, protectors and predators. And no one, not even humans themselves, could say which face was true. The first united resistance came in the Rimward systems, where a coalition of small empires banded together under a single banner. They called themselves the Pact of Balance, a desperate alliance of the fearful. The Pact's fleets were vast, cobbled together from dozens of worlds, bristling with old technology and borrowed designs. They knew they could not match humanity in discipline, nor in fury, but they believed that numbers, unity, and sheer scale would prevail. Their first strike came swift and unexpected. A human convoy, escorting refugees from liberated colonies, was ambushed by a Pact fleet 3 times its size. The battle was fierce, the humans fighting with their usual relentlessness, But numbers told the story. Ship after ship was torn apart. The convoy burned. For the first time in years, a human fleet was destroyed. The galaxy erupted. To some, the destruction of a human fleet was proof that the War Apes could be stopped. To others, it was proof that the galaxy had crossed a line from fear to open war. On Earth, the news was received with grief and fury. Memorials filled the streets. Families wept, and yet beneath the sorrow was something darker. They ambushed us, the leaders declared. They slaughtered civilians. This was not war. This was murder. Factories that had slowed increased production once more. Shipyards expanded further still. Recruitment surged. The War Apes had tasted defeat, and defeat for them was never an end. It was fuel. The next campaign was not one of liberation, but of retaliation. Human fleets swept into packed territory with a fury the galaxy had not seen since the early days of vengeance. Entire star systems were blockaded. Fleets shattered. Fortresses reduced to silence. Worlds that had joined the pack surrendered one by one. Their leaders kneeling, their people whispering that perhaps fear was safer than resistance. But with each victory, the questions grew louder. Were the War Apes still fighting for safety? Or had they begun to fight for dominance? In the Ithri academies, scholars debated endlessly. This is the moment. One declared, this is when history will define them. If they stop, they will be remembered as liberators. If they continue, they will be remembered as conquerors. But others shook their heads. Do you not yet understand? They cannot stop. They do not know how. They are built for momentum. Every loss teaches them. Every victory emboldens them. To stop now would be to deny what they have become. And in alien marketplaces, whispers spread like fire. The War Apes bleed, but they do not die. The War Apes retreat, but only to strike harder. The War Apes are coming. On Earth, the divide sharpened into open conflict of words. In one parliament, a senator rose and cried, "We must stop. We cannot build empire on ashes. Our destiny is not to rule, but to endure." Another answered with equal passion, "Endure? Survive? That is no destiny. Our fleets stretch across the stars, our people united as never before. We are not simply surviving, we are rising. And if the galaxy resists, then let it resist. We will not be stopped." The chamber erupted, voices clashing like storms, the air heavy with the weight of choice that could not be delayed. And so Section 6 draws to its turning point. The galaxy had gathered against the War Apes. Humanity had struck back with vengeance. The line between protector and conqueror blurred until it could scarcely be seen. And above it all, a storm gathered, not just of fleets and empires, but of destiny itself. Would humanity temper its fury with restraint, or let ambition carry it to empire? Would the galaxy see them as saviors, or bow to them as rulers? The storm was coming, and in its thunder, the War Apes marched forward. The storm had come. For years, the galaxy had whispered of the War Apes, of their fury, their vengeance, their relentless advance. They had risen from victims to avengers, from avengers to empire builders, from empire builders to destiny itself. And now, the galaxy stood on the edge of a single question. Would humanity's rise end in peace or in fire? The pact of balance had fallen. The Draelics were broken. Yet still, the great powers could not agree. Some believed humanity's fury could be guided, allied, anchored to a future of shared survival. Others believed humanity could only be resisted, contained, destroyed before they grew too strong. But time had run out. The War Apes had already grown too strong. And so, in the darkness of the void, the galaxy gathered for the greatest conflict it had ever known. It began in the Keelan Expanse, where the fleets of 5 empires converged against humanity's advancing lines. Their banners glowed with the symbols of unity: the feathered Chinean, the scale-croft, the silver-skinned Helari, the wise Ithri, and the remnants of lesser powers. Together, they brought fleets numbering in the thousands. Against them, the War Apes brought fewer ships, but ships forged in fire, crewed by soldiers who had forgotten the meaning of surrender. The first engagement shook the stars. Alien fleets swept forward with precision. their weapons carving lines of fire across the void. Human ships answered not with retreat, but with defiance. They fought in tight formations, each vessel covering another, each sacrifice feeding the momentum of the whole. Where one fell, another surged forward. Where lines broke, humans filled the gap with burning engines and fearless resolve. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. For days, the battles raged. Human fleets were pushed to the brink, their ships scarred and burning. Yet every retreat was followed by a counterattack. Every loss fueled their resolve. Every defeat sharpened their blades. Reports carried across council chambers told the same story again and again. The War Apes bleed, but they do not fall. The War Apes break, but they do not scatter. The War Apes fight until only silence remains. And for the first time, the great empires began to doubt their unity. On Earth, the news arrived in waves of fire and grief. Families wept. Cities prayed. Factories roared louder than ever. The image of the child and the mother, the spark that started it all, returned every screen, every speech, every memory. Leaders stood before their people and declared, "We will not bow. We will not stop. We will not allow the galaxy to decide our fate. We will decide it ourselves." And with that vow, humanity unleashed its final reserves. New fleets poured from the shipyards. Colonies emptied their vaults of ore. Generations of workers, engineers, and soldiers united in a single purpose. Not merely to fight, but to endure. Not merely to endure, but to claim their destiny. The final battle came at Orion's edge, where the last coalition of empires stood in defiance. It was there that the galaxy's fate would be decided. The coalition brought everything. Fleets that stretched across the horizon, fortresses bristling with weapons, armies ready to fight to the last. They believed that sheer numbers would finally drown the War Apes. But humanity had never measured war in numbers. When the first volleys tore across the void, human fleets surged forward with the same relentlessness that had carried them from the ashes of their first tragedy. They rammed when their guns failed. They fought hand to hand when their ships were boarded. They turned defeat into ambushes, losses into traps, chaos into victory. The galaxy had called them War Apes. And in that moment, the name became prophecy. When the battle ended, silence fell across the stars. The coalition fleets lay scattered, broken. Their empires, once united, were fractured once more, each retreating into the shadows of their own fear. Humanity, bloody but unbroken, stood victorious. But their victory did not come with cheers. There were no parades, no banners of triumph. Humanity did not sing of conquest. Instead, they stood in silence, staring at what they had become. For in their victory, they had inherited something far greater and far heavier than vengeance. They had inherited responsibility. The galaxy watched as the War Apes rebuilt. But this time, they did not only rebuild for themselves. On liberated worlds, human engineers stayed to help restore. On shattered colonies, human soldiers protected instead of occupying. And in alien councils, emissaries of Earth came not to demand tribute, but to offer treaties. Treaties written not in arrogance, but in steel-edged truth. "We are not saviors," they declared. "We are not conquerors. We are survivors. And in surviving, we have become strong. If you stand with us, we will fight beside you. If you stand against us, we will fight until you cannot." The choice was left the galaxy. And slowly, cautiously, one empire after another chose alliance. The age of fear did not end, but it changed. The galaxy no longer whispered of the War Apes as monsters in the dark. They whispered of them as guardians, as warriors, as a species who had risen from tragedy to power. Some still feared their fury. Some still plotted resistance. But none dared again to underestimate them. For humanity had proven the truth of the pirate commander's last words. To harm their children was to doom yourself. And from that doom, a new order had been born. Final closing. So the story ends where it began, with tragedy, with vengeance, with the fire of survival. But it does not end in silence. It ends in legacy. The War Apes had risen. The War Apes had endured. The War Apes had claimed their place among the stars. And in every corner of the galaxy, one truth was known, unshakable, eternal. Humanity will never be underestimated again. If this story gripped you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who love epic tales of war and destiny. And tell me in the comments, do you believe humanity, if pushed to the edge, would fight with the same fury? Or will we choose another path? Your voice keeps these stories alive, and together, we'll bring more journeys like this to the stars.